We live in an era that considers itself civilized. We constantly talk about progress, human rights, democracy, international justice. We like to think that we have evolved, that unlike our ancestors, we better understand what is right and what is wrong. We believe that the modern world is governed by principles, clear rules, universal values, but every so often something happens that tests that idea, a war, and when that happens, something strange begins to appear. The moral rules that seem so firm suddenly become flexible, depending on who is fighting. In theory, the modern international system is based on relatively simple principles. Borders must be respected. The sovereignty of states is fundamental. Invading another country is a serious violation of the international order. At least, that's the theory. When Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine, much of the international community reacted quickly. Governments around the world issued condemnations. Economic sanctions were applied, assets were frozen, military alliances and international aid were organized. The message seemed clear. In the 21st century, the war of conquest has no place. The world had decided to defend certain principles. At least, that seemed to be the case. But international politics has a curious characteristic. The rules are not always applied in the same way. When armed conflicts involve powers like the United States or strategic allies like Israel, the reactions of the international system are often more complex. Condemnations are not always unanimous. Sanctions do not always arrive, and many times the debate becomes more ambiguous. Some governments justify military actions in the name of security. Others criticize them. Many prefer not to take a stance, and then an uncomfortable question arises. Invading another country is unacceptable because the international reaction is not always the same. International principles are truly universal, or they depend on the political context, but it would be too simple to think that the contradiction belongs only to one side. In almost all conflicts in the world, something similar happens. Governments denounce aggression when they are victims, but justify violence when they believe it is necessary for their security. Nations talk about peace, but invest enormous resources in weaponry. Political leaders condemn wars while preparing for the next one. Each country tends to see itself as a defender of justice. Each government believes its cause is legitimate, and almost all are convinced that the real problem is the enemy. But if one observes history with some distance, one begins to notice a pattern. The arguments used by different sides are often surprisingly similar. Everyone talks about defense. Everyone talks about security. Everyone assures that their war is inevitable. Perhaps the problem is not only political, but also deeply human. Swiss psychologist Carl Jung spoke of something he called the shadow, the dark part of the human mind, the one we prefer to ignore. Aggression, the desire for power, the need to dominate. According to Jung, people tend to project that part of themselves onto others. What we don't want to recognize in ourselves, we see clearly in the enemy. Something similar happens between nations. Countries condemn the violence of the adversary, but rarely analyze their own with the same severity. In every war, there are at least two stories, two interpretations of the same conflict, two societies convinced they are fighting to survive, two peoples certain they have the moral high ground. Each side believes it is on the right side of history, and each side sees the other as the threat. But as the years go by, historians analyze the events with more distance. Reality is often much more complex. Wars are rarely fought between absolute good and absolute evil. More often, they are fought between two sides convinced of their own virtue. Perhaps the true contradiction of the modern world is not the existence of wars. Wars have accompanied humanity for thousands of years. The contradiction is something else. We claim to believe in universal principles. We talk about international justice. We defend rules that should apply to everyone, but many times those rules change, depending on who holds the power. And then there is an uncomfortable question if we really believe in those principles. Are we willing to apply them equally to everyone, even when it makes us uncomfortable? Because perhaps humanity's greatest challenge is not winning wars. Perhaps it is something much more difficult, being consistent with the values we claim to defend. If you liked the video, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe. I'll read your comments.